How do I start? Probably use a cold open because I'm awkward. Welcome to the first episode of Think About It, Murder Mondays, which is a long form continuation of the series I started on TikTok, where I'll go through different crimes, murders, things like that, research them with you, and give my opinions, my perception, and start a conversation that I would love for you to join as well and give me your perspective. Because the more perspectives we can look at one truth with, the more likely we are to be able to find that central truth that actually matters. Because we have to consider intersexualism, and that's literally the different parts of each person's life. It's any place where someone's perception can cross someone else's. So someone who grew up white can relate to feeling white. They have this similar experience and how that relates to their perception. So for me, some of my intersections are white, AFAB, non-binary, trans, autistic. I have the intersectionality of someone who's been heavy and someone who's now average. I don't know what that means. I assume it means you wear a medium, because this guy. Since this is our first episode, I guess I should go over what Think About It really entails. When I'm learning about something new or sit and think about anything that I'm learning about, frequently I'll try and find everything I can. And rather than just reading about it or researching it, it's kind of a combination of research, obsessing, investigating, and then where I can actually visiting sites. And when it comes to the media reporting on things, a lot of times people will see the first few big headlines, but they won't see the redactions and the corrections that are written smaller later on as more information comes out. And it's capitalism. Media is trying to sell you themselves, essentially. They want to tell you the stories that you're interested in. And so if the story doesn't seem interesting, or like a lot of people would even care, then it may not even get reported on at all. Or it, after those first couple of big headlines, could just drop off. Throughout these, I want the focus to be on how each of these victims did not go to wherever they went the day we're going to talk about, expecting for a shooter to come in and kill them. And how easily that could be my workplace, your workplace, anywhere. I don't want at any point to glorify what these people have done. I want to bring in an awareness to what they've done and how they could literally be anyone. Because at this point, there's not much in the way of protecting ourselves. And it seems like every day almost, we're hearing more news of mass shootings happening to the point where so many are getting lost. We have to consider every situation from every possible perspective if we are going to find that central truth. And unfortunately, that means we have to constantly be playing devil's advocate and debating almost with our own opinions to ensure that we're giving everyone involved in this situation a fair chance. This comes down to, if you look at it with the bias that everything you're researching is going to tell you that they were just evil and they did it because they were bad, that's probably all you're going to find. So I always start from a place of empathy, understanding, and taking everything as it is without bias and emotion. And that doesn't mean that I think these people did a good thing. I obviously don't. But I like that they're getting lost, because people are going to, I'm depressed and I could get famous. And so then they try and enact something. I don't want to make anyone famous. Let's sit and have a dink. In today's Murder Monday, we're going to be looking at the 2019 Virginia Beach shooting. I settled on this one because I have been to Virginia Beach many times. I grew up in Richmond. The place I'm going to start is the place I usually start, every teacher and professor's nightmare: Wikipedia. I like to start here because I consider Wikipedia, whether correct or false, to be the generally accepted truth. Not that central truth that we're looking for, but it's what most people, having read most headlines, but a little bit deeper, you can find bits of important things, especially the basic information, like locations, maps, number of victims, number of wounded, all kinds of things. And then you can find sources to look deeper into each of these things. But it's so general and it can be so easily biased because people can't edit it, which is why teachers and professors hate it. But I like that because we can see what is perceived. On May 31st, 2019, a shooter entered a municipal building in Virginia Beach and fatally shot 12 people and wounded 4 others. He was then shot dead by responding officers. That's the intro for Wikipedia. It gives us our basics. Then it goes into shooting and it gives a brief detailing of what happened. So they say that perpetrator fatally shot a person in a car in a parking lot at the Virginia Beach Municipal Center, and one person on the steps entering the building before shooting people on all 3 floors. This is the building, the Public Works Utilities Planning Department. And he was an employee at this location and, in fact, still had a security badge on him, according to this, that he could have gotten in with. Initially, victims thought the sounds were from a nail gun or something similar until an email was sent out from the communications office to essentially let everyone know in the building, in the area that worked for them, be on the lookout, essentially. Hide, run, whatever they expect us to do. It says the police response to the shooting was slowed due to electronic security doors that required a badge. And like I said, the shooter had a badge. And the last thing that their summary of the shooting lets us know is that the perpetrator had purchased the firearms legally within the last 3 years. It doesn't tell us anything about motive, mental health. And we get a short bio about the victims. 11 employees had a combined 150 years of service for city employees, and one was a contractor in the building to obtain permit. So like he was just coming to use services of the municipal building, file his paperwork to get a permit. The rest were just there because it was their job. 6 of the employees worked for the Public Utilities Department, which is where the killer also worked. 4 other people were injured and hospitalized, 3 in critical condition, in addition to a police officer that was shot in the ballistic vest. According to family attorney, one of the victims contemplated bringing a pistol with her to work the night prior to the shooting, but did not due to a city policy forbidding it. So that tells me she was probably uncomfortable or suspicious that something was gonna happen, because usually before something like this, there is some sign, some form of aggression, distance, something. You can usually tell if someone is acting differently because they're planning something. Reactions, lots of thoughts and prayers from mayors, governors, attorney generals. Tried to quell both sides of the gun control debate, asking all to avoid knee-jerk reactions and bipartisan bureaucratic malpractice. So this is, to me, an example of the government staying neutral, which they continue to do with gun control. They could make changes. In fact, we may cover the cases that for other countries were that last straw, that gun control moment. I just did a search for the shooting. This is the Washington Post, and the headline is Virginia Beach mass shooter motivated by perceived workplace grievances, FBI finds. He had been obsessed about this grievance for years. No motive for the mass shooting could be identified. So they state a motive and then say that FBI conclusions stand in contrast to results of previous investigations by the Virginia Beach Police Department and outside consultants hired by the city. Those reviews ended inconclusively, stating that no motive for the mass shooting could be identified. Sounds like we had a motive. The city's persistent unwillingness to specify motive had angered some victims' relatives who argued that it had been clear that the shooter was a disgruntled employee. They alleged that city officials failed to deal effectively with the shooter before it was too late, and that it felt great when the FBI confirmed their feelings. Their refusal to acknowledge the shooter's workplace-related motive was a tactic to avoid legal liability, says Jason Nixon, whose wife, Kate, was among those killed. He claims that he had been trying, or is still trying, to get them to listen, and they're afraid of litigation. Julie Hill, a spokeswoman for the city, said the FBI's findings should not be viewed as contradicting the results of earlier investigations by the city police and a consulting firm. Instead, Hill said, the new findings are an extension of the work begun by the city, claiming that they asked for the FBI's help because the FBI had higher level of expertise. City officials have repeatedly denied that their workers suffer from a hostile office environment, saying such accusations are not backed up by employee surveys, including one performed in 2019 after the shooting. I don't think I've ever filled out the anonymous work survey with how I actually felt about work, so I just want to leave that as a note. Nash and others are saying they believe that this was because of workplace issues. He had struggled on the job and complained of mistreatment, according to previously disclosed evidence. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, he was dealing with a vendor payment problem in which the city attorney's office had become involved. That morning, he went to Municipal Center at 7, and then just after 10:30, mailed a resignation letter, so we'll probably end up looking at that. And in the afternoon, he visited job sites with coworkers. Minutes before he retrieved his weapon from the vehicle, he had a suppressor and an extended magazine, which means to me that he was going in not to be threatening, but to do damage. He sent a work-related email that gave no hint of the attack. An analysis found that the shooter was motivated by perceived workplace grievances, which he fixated on for years and struggled with how he perceived his own work and performance and how others at work viewed him. His inflated sense of self-importance contributed to this conflict and led him to believe he was unjustly and repeatedly criticized and slighted. Violence was viewed by the shooter as a way to reconcile this conflict and resolve his previous view of justice. This is kind of the similar explanation that we get about most shooters. And that's why I do like to dig into their history, even if we don't want to know who they are. We still need to know how they got there. This is also from the Washington Post, and they're quoting his resignation letter that he sent a few hours before the shooting. I want to officially put in my 2 weeks notice to vacant. I wonder if that's a typo with Washington Post, or if that's a typo in his letter, or if I'm crazy. I officially put in my 2 weeks notice to vacate my position of Engineer 3 with the City of Virginia Beach. It has been a pleasure to serve the city, but due to personal reasons, I must relieve my position. Very basic letter. It determined his last day would be June 14th, and he never explained what his personal reasons were. City manager Dave Hansen said To my knowledge, the perpetrator's performance was satisfactory and that he was in good standing with his department. There were no issues of discipline ongoing. So he didn't have a record, but he had been known to complain about his treatment. So we have to consider that in the overall, I guess. It says that when his family found out, there was nothing but shock, but no one ever actually expects anyone to do this. And if they have suspicions that they're going to, they think, they're just a little extra, or they're just saying things because they're mad. But we don't actually know that, do we? Their intent could be that what they're saying is their intent. So any sign that seems off, which I don't know, with his emails and things, there may not have seemed much off. We'll get there. The shooter had gotten married to his wife Valentine's Day 2008. In 2016 they separated, and then they divorced in 2017. So this could have some evidence that things had slowly started changing for our shooter. He was a quiet employee. He didn't socialize a whole lot outside of the office. Also sounds highly familiar of many of the shooters, but also of me. Being awkward doesn't make you a killer. Here's another article. Perceived grievances drove Virginia Beach gunman to kill 12 FBI fines. This is New York Times. They claim he had been fixated for years on criticism at work. Getting a lot of repeat words. Here are some of the reasons that the city gave for not finding a motive. Despite exhaustive investigative work and in spite of unsubstantiated rumors and accusations, it appears we may never know why he committed this heinous act. He did not leave a note or any reasoning that they could find, because again, we don't know if he left anything. We just know nothing was found. We always have to consider that everyone has a perspective. So just because there were no witnesses and there's no one here to tell you that it didn't happen doesn't mean anything. No, I'm not standing up for the killers. Jeez. They said there were no common characteristics among the victims who were killed and injured relating to their age, race, or gender. But the thing that I've already noticed stood out is that almost all of them were coworkers. And for all we know, the contractor could have just been wrong place, wrong time, as they all were, obviously. But it's also incredibly possible that the shooter didn't particularly aim and just wanted to do as much damage as possible. He had worked for the Public Utilities Department for more than 9 years. So I said the divorce may have had something to do with things changing for the shooter. And this article from AP News. At times, the suspect referenced the belief he was being tasked with work outside of his pay grade. This concern was specifically addressed by his supervisors in 2018. The suspect told that he had been making improvements and was given encouragement. I was unable to locate any documentation of filed complaints or disciplinary actions, but it makes sense that these wouldn't be readily available because they are filed with the city and could have sensitive information. Although some might say they're keeping the complaints quiet because they would reveal where they had failed their employees or that they're covering for themselves. So I decided to look into this another way, and I went to Indeed and Glassdoor and found what former and current employees had to say about the work environment. It seems overall, people state the coworkers are friendly, you have job security, good insurance, but overall, the job seems like it's a stressful one. As is this con says, no room for error, lives are literally on the line. That on top of something like this other employee was saying with racism or sexism or any other kind of stressor from upper management, such as being demanded a workload without proper compensation. And then the fact that this quote, public sector doesn't pay as well, but that's the nature of municipal work. And that sentence right there is where I think the problem is. People just get this low paying job because they love the work usually and they want to help their city, but they understand, much like teachers and many other jobs, that it's not going to pay. The reviews varied. Some like this one feeling it's a good job, but with a few complaints like disapproval of the CEO. Others were less than flattering, where the opinion is low, but the pro of 13 paid days off seems kind of like a con to me. But the one I felt balanced all of them into one idea is this one, 3 stars, titled City of Virginia Beach, in which they state that the job itself is pretty laid back and that there are good benefits and a flexible schedule, but also complains of little room to advance, racism, and sexism. And as it is the average 3 stars, right in the middle, I feel like this is probably what a lot of people felt. Feel free to look for more documents, more reviews, and share those with me because I couldn't find them and I would love to see them. I wanted to see if there was a way to back up the reviews, so I found this 2020 report from City of Virginia Beach Human Resources, and it has the average pays and the racial makeup. And while this doesn't tell us anything about how management handled racism or any other HR complaints, we can see that the managers and officials and administrators, they are making a whole lot more than everyone else. And the balance just seems very off to me, especially when the lowest of 35,500 is not very livable. You're not going to do much with that. I would like to clarify here that I am not claiming that anyone other than the shooter is at fault for these deaths. I'm also not saying that someone with a hard life or a crappy job or depression, etc., is going to be a killer. But understanding how he specifically may have gotten to this point in relation to how his work, home life, and mental health affected him can help us improve the job situations and have more adequate support for workers. Mental health care in the US and gun control are some of the leading factors in would-be shooters going down this path. So anything an employer, especially a government employer, can do to support the well-being of their staff should be implemented. Through conversation like this, maybe we'll be able to find what those things could be. I was unable to find a lot of information about the shooter himself. We know that he was 40 years old and that his birthday was October 15th, 1978, and that he was registered Democrat. That's some of the only consistent information I can find. Everything else seems to be quoted from somewhere else, and some of the facts seem to change. However, one thing seems to be true, that other than in appearance, the shooter seemed to suit a lot of the cliches of a shooter. But I feel like the ways in which he does not line up with that cliche is maybe the reason that it didn't get a lot of news coverage and it's not that big of a story now. The Virginia Pilot spoke with some who knew the shooter. Former city employee who used to park next to the shooter most mornings said that he would be selective in who he talked to. He never gave me the time of day. Although those closest to him, such as his parents and ex-wife, don't seem to want to speak to the media. It seems like all of his superiors or coworkers who have commented on the shooter's work performance referred to it as satisfactory. He was a project manager that was often out in the field and dealt with the public. There are many clients of the shooters that had positive things to say about him. Rose Thornton brought her grievances about a plumbing repair that was to replace old pump stations and put in new sewer lines, and said that he was a very good listener and that he was nice. He was known to hand out his business card to residents so that they could easily contact him if they had any need of the public works services. She also stated that a construction project starting felt like an earthquake and shook her house, which was next to the work site. The shooter came to check on her and her home, and she mentioned a ceramic angel that had fallen and broken. Then Thornton, 77, said, quote, "Next thing I know, he's coming to my door with a little angel in his hands. He brought me an angel, and here he is out killing people." End quote. Despite how the public seemed to view him, his coworkers found him quiet and said that if they spoke to them in the halls frequently, he would just ignore them and not return their greeting. Though he did have a couple of close coworkers, some of them didn't know that he had been married or that he had been divorced. On the day of the shooting, he continued to work as if it was a normal day. He reported to job site and was there from 2:30 until 3, and about an hour later at 4 p.m., he changed gears entirely and began taking aim at those who worked with him. Join me next week as we go over the timeline of the shooting and discuss the victims, and we'll look at some diagrams of the shooter's pathway and things like that. White people who grew up white, that doesn't change when you grow up, usually. Michael Jackson?